Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where school bells don't ring, where there are no blackboards covered in chalk dust, and where your biggest fear is not forgetting homework, but forgetting your prayers. It's the year 10195, and you are standing in the cold stone corridor of a monastery in northern France. The air smells faintly of damp parchment and beeswax candles. A single bell echoes through the cloisters, summoning sleepy novices to their lessons. Their bare feet slap against the flagstones, robes swishing, eyes half closed, mumbling Latin they barely understand. You're about to join them, though you probably won't survive this timetable. There's no recess, no lunch break with pizza, and if you fall asleep in class, let's just say the wake-up call involves a stick. So before you step inside that drafty classroom of monks and manuscripts, go ahead and subscribe for more calm history nights. Drop a comment with your local time and where you're tuning in from. I'd love to know if you're listening under medieval stars or modern neon lights. And if you're ready, let's take a slow breath and walk into the world of medieval schools. Tonight, we leave behind TikTok and textbooks and enter parchment, prayers and punishment. Sweet dreams, but only after we survive the lesson. You push open the wooden door, and the smell of ink, parchment and unwashed wool greets you. This is school in the early medieval world, and its beating heart lies inside the church. When people in the 10th or 11th century said education, they didn't mean a red brick building with a playground. They meant the monastery, the abbey, or the cathedral. School was not an institution for the masses. It was a guarded passage into the sacred life, an extension of religious devotion. You sit down on a rough wooden bench, one of many lined against the walls. Around you, boys whisper fragments of prayers, their eyes darting nervously toward the master. You notice something missing, girls. Unless you were in a convent, this world belonged entirely to young men. Education was about preparing minds for service to God. To read was to read scripture. To write was to copy scripture. To speak well was to preach scripture. Everything else, numbers, history, even music, bowed to religion. The monastery is alive with sounds. The deep toll of bells, the chanting of monks, and the scratching of quills on parchment. Imagine how rare parchment is. Each sheet is made from animal skin, stretched, scraped, and polished until smooth. The thought of wasting it terrifies you. Every mark counts. Every blotch of ink is a small sin against the hours of labor it took to create. So you hold your quill carefully, dipping it into ink made of oak galls and iron salts. The tip squeaks faintly as you trace the first letters of the alphabet. In Latin, of course, there's no A, B, C. Instead, you begin with A, ab, abs, prepositions from the Vulgate Bible. The master watches closely. He's a monk with sharp eyes and a whip of authority in his hand. Sometimes, literally, his job is not to make learning fun. It is to make you holy, disciplined, obedient, and literate in Latin. The language of Rome has long since faded from the streets, but in the cloister, it rules unchallenged. Every prayer, every psalm, every hymn, Latin. If you want to understand the Mass or copy a sermon or one day become a priest, Latin is your passport. Without it, you are illiterate in both faith and power. But you're not only here to learn words, you're here to be shaped. The early medieval classroom is about forming habits. Rise with the bells, pray, read, chant, copy, pray again, study, copy again. Your days are broken into hours by the tolling of the monastery clock, not a mechanical one, but the steady rhythm of canonical hours. Matins at midnight, lauds at dawn, prime, terza, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Each lesson fits into this sacred cycle. School is not separate from worship. It is worship. Your master tells you to recite. You stumble through the opening of the Gospel of John. In principio erat verbum, et verbum erat apud Deum, et Deus erat verbum. You know the words before you know their meaning. Memorization comes first, comprehension later. It feels backward, but that's the way of things here. Understanding is earned through endless repetition. The rhythms of chanting anchor knowledge deep in your bones. When your voice falters, the boy next to you elbows you sharply. He doesn't want the class punished as a whole. Discipline is collective. If one forgets, all suffer, and suffer means kneeling on cold stone floors for an hour. or receiving lashes from the master's rod. Strangely, no one thinks this cruel. It's correction, the necessary fire to shape young minds like iron at a forge. As you look around, you realize how small this class is. Perhaps a dozen boys, no more. There are no grades, no hundreds of students packed in rows. Each monastery decides who learns here. Usually, they are future monks. Sometimes sons of noble patrons. Occasionally poor boys of talent chosen for charity. For the vast majority of children in medieval Europe, school is not even a rumour. Their classroom is the field, the loom, the market stall. But here in this cloister, learning is alive, even if it is cloaked in Latin robes. Your first lessons are simple: letters, prayers, psalms, then grammar, how words fit together, how sentences can be formed, how scripture reveals its hidden meanings. But even this simplicity demands a razor-sharp memory. No textbooks are handed out. The master recites, you repeat. He dictates, you copy. He reads, you chant. Knowledge is something passed from one living voice to another, like fire handed from torch to torch. As the hours stretch on, your mind wanders. You imagine the outside world, the fields, the villages, the noise of markets. In here, the air is hushed, the walls painted with saints staring down at you, their eyes reminding you that every mistake is noticed, not only by the master but by God himself. It's a heavy burden for a child, yet somehow this weight is what creates the discipline that defines medieval scholarship. By the time the bell rings for sext, the midday prayer, you are exhausted. Your stomach growls, but food will wait. Bread, beans, maybe a bit of cheese if you're lucky, all eaten in silence, while another monk reads aloud from scripture. Even meals are lessons. Silence is discipline. Listening is obedience, and obedience is the foundation of both faith and education. So this is the first medieval school you've stepped into. Not a building with a playground, but a cloister with candles and whips, prayers and parchment. Knowledge here is sacred, dangerous and exclusive, and you're only at the beginning of the journey. The bell has rung again, and you shuffle back into the narrow classroom, stomach still humming from the meagre meal of beans and dark bread. The master stands at the front, waiting with his rod in hand. His eyes scan the room, sharp and hawk-like. He doesn't need to raise his voice. The silence of the monastery gives his presence weight enough. You sit straighter, gripping your wax tablet and stylus as though your life depends on it. Because in some ways, it does. Today's lesson will not be about simple memorization of psalms or prayers. Today you are stepping into the curriculum itself, the great foundation of medieval education, the Trivium. You probably never thought you'd survive grammar class, but here it's more than a subject. It's the beating heart of learning. The Trivium grammar, rhetoric, logic shapes the way every student in the Middle Ages is taught, from the lowest monastery novice to the ambitious scholars at Paris or Oxford. It's not 3 classes the way you might imagine a timetable. It's a whole intellectual journey, a way of turning your scattered words into precise weapons of thought. Without it, you are nothing more than a mumbling peasant. With it, you can read, argue, persuade, and eventually rise. The master begins with grammatica. In your modern world, grammar is the thing you half ignore while texting, but here grammar is divine law. To understand Latin, you must dissect it like a surgeon. Declensions, conjugations, cases, tenses. Every noun bends itself into 6 cases: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, vocative. Every verb dances through person, number, tense, mood and voice. You chant them aloud with the others: amo, amas, amas, amas. The words blur into song, drilled into your skull until they hum there without effort. But grammar isn't just about forming sentences. It's about preserving the ancient wisdom of the Church Fathers, the Roman poets, and most of all, scripture. You copy down phrases from Priscian, a Roman grammarian whose work still dominates desks in the 11th century. Imagine his words written centuries ago in the twilight of the empire, and now your textbook. You carve his rules into your wax tablet, scrape them away, and write again until the grooves feel natural under your stylus. Now comes the real challenge. Rhetorica, the art of persuasion. The master paces slowly as he explains. A priest who cannot speak with beauty cannot move hearts. A scholar who cannot argue cannot defend truth. A lawyer without rhetoric is nothing but a fool in a courtroom. Rhetoric is about how you use language, how you shape it, twist it, and polish it until it dazzles. Here, Cicero and Quintilian stand as your distant mentors. The master dictates passages. What then shall we say? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? He waits. You are expected not just to recite, but to interpret, to argue its meaning, to persuade the listener that your understanding is correct. The room grows tense as each boy attempts his answer. Some stumble, others flourish, rolling their words with practiced confidence. The master nods to the strong ones, frowns at the weak. A joke would lighten the mood, but jokes are dangerous here. Still, you can't help but think, so basically, this is medieval debate club, except with more bruises if you lose. And then, the most dreaded, logica. Logic is not a subject you can fake. Here you enter the sharp world of Aristotle. Filtered through Christian scholars, logic is about reasoning, about knowing why something is true, and proving it step by step. You are introduced to syllogisms. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It seems simple enough until the master throws theological puzzles at you. If God is eternal, and Christ is man, how then do we speak of time and mortality? Your brain, already fogged from chanting grammar rules, feels ready to explode. Yet this is the training ground. This is what makes the difference between a boy who can parrot verses and a scholar who can stand in the court of kings. The trivium shapes not only your knowledge, but your very way of thinking. Grammar teaches you what words mean. Rhetoric teaches you how to use them. Logic teaches you why they hold or fail. The trio is inseparable, like three stones in an arch. Without them you collapse. With them you rise. Hours pass. The candles drip low. And still you chant. The monotony is broken only by the occasional slap of the master's rod on a table when someone's recitation falters. It's a constant reminder. This isn't education for amusement. This is survival training for the mind. And the strange thing? You begin to see its effect. Your ears sharpen. You catch subtle mistakes in others' Latin. Your tongue loosens. Words flow more confidently, their endings snapping into place like puzzle pieces. Your thoughts stretch. You find yourself questioning not only what is said, but why it is said. Outside the monastery walls, life goes on. Peasants tilling fields, merchants shouting in markets, mothers rocking babies by smoky hearths. Most of them cannot even scratch their names. Yet here, you wrestle with abstract puzzles and ancient texts. It's as though you live in a different universe, a world shaped not by ploughs and seasons, but by ink and syllables. Of course, there's no escaping the human side of schooling. Between lessons, the boys whisper and tease. Someone smuggles in a crust of bread, and suddenly half the class is leaning in, desperate for a crumb. Another scribbles a rude doodle in his wax tablet. When the master's back is turned, stick figures that look suspiciously like monks with oversized bellies. You suppress a laugh because one chuckle out loud and the rod will descend. Medieval humor is risky business. Sometimes, you're so weary that the lines of Latin blur before your eyes. That's when your neighbor elbows you again, hissing, "Stay awake." If you nod off, you'll find yourself kneeling in the cold chapel through the night, whispering penitential psalms until your knees ache. Yes, that's the medieval version of detention. And you thought writing "I will not talk in class" 100 times was bad. The trivium isn't mastered in a day. Years are spent circling these three pillars. Some never rise beyond grammar. Others stumble at rhetoric, their voices never finding polish. But those who survive all three emerge with sharpened minds, capable of interpreting scripture, arguing doctrine, writing letters for nobles, even drafting laws. It's not schooling the way you think of it. It's the scaffolding of an entire worldview. As the sun dips behind the monastery walls, the master dismisses you. The lessons are not over. Your day will end with more chanting at vespers, and then perhaps another hour scratching at parchment by candlelight. But for now, you step outside into the courtyard. The cool evening air fills your lungs, and for a moment, you almost feel free. The sky is streaked with the last gold of the sunset, and the bell tower looms above, dark against the light. You know tomorrow the cycle begins again. Grammar, rhetoric, logic, endless drills, endless repetition. Yet slowly, day by day, the trivium worms its way into you, shaping not just your speech but your very thoughts. It's hard not to smirk at the thought. Imagine explaining to a modern kid that your subjects are chanting verbs, memorizing Cicero and proving syllogisms about God's nature. They'd probably last 10 minutes before begging for a math worksheet instead. But here in the cloister, there is no alternative. The trivium is survival. The trivium is power, and power in the medieval world belongs to those who master word. By the time you collapse onto your straw pallet, the chants still echo in your head. Amoro, Amars, Amard. Grammar has clung to you like a lullaby, and as you drift into uneasy sleep, you realize that tomorrow you'll repeat it all again, until one day, without noticing, you'll find yourself not just parroting, but understanding, not just following, but leading. That is the promise of the trivium. It breaks you down, drills you hard, and then rebuilds you into something sharper than before. The candles are lit again, their small flames wobbling against the draught, sneaking through the cracks of the shuttered windows. The room smells of wax, ink and wool, and you're still shaking the sleep from your eyes after the long drone of grammar drills. But there's no escape. The master announces that tonight's lesson belongs to the quadrivium, the 4 higher subjects that sit atop the trivium like the crown of medieval learning. You've wrestled with words, but now you step into the world of numbers, harmonies and stars. The curriculum sounds majestic, but in practice, it's a mixture of awe, frustration, and more than a little confusion. The first of the 4 is arithmetic, and if you thought chanting verb endings was rough, wait until you meet medieval math. There are no pocket calculators, no handy notebooks with multiplication tables. You scratch numbers on your wax tablet using Roman numerals, those clunky soldiers of calculation that march across your page like stubborn little bricks. IV, X, L, C, D, M. Try dividing with those and you'll understand why half the class looks like they're praying for divine intervention. You mutter under your breath as you try to subtract CDLXX9 from DCC CCXL, wishing someone would just invent 0 already. The master insists you grasp not only counting but the philosophy of numbers. Arithmetic isn't merely practical, it's spiritual. Numbers are woven into the universe by God himself. The perfection of the number 3 points to the Trinity. 7 mirrors the days of creation. 12 reflects the apostles. Every sum is an echo of divine order. Suddenly math feels less like punishment and more like prophecy, though the headache it leaves is all too human. Once your brain is fried from arithmetic, you are shoved into geometry. Not the geometry of neat textbooks with diagrams, but geometry born from Roman land surveyors and Greek thinkers. You trace shapes with your stylus. Triangles, circles, squares. You learn that a right angle holds 90 degrees, though no one's giving you a protractor to check. Geometry is not just lines and shapes. It's a tool for measuring the world, fields, walls, even the proportions of churches. When a bishop commissions a new cathedral, it's geometry that dictates how the stones are cut, how the arches hold, how the towers rise. Your master reminds you that without geometry, buildings collapse. You glance at the cracked monastery wall and silently hope he's exaggerating. Then comes music, which is not the fun strumming of lutes you were hoping for. Instead, you're introduced to the mathematics of sound. To the medieval mind, music is cosmic order, made audible. You chant the modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian. You learn how notes form ratios, how intervals resonate. The master demonstrates with a monochord, a single-string instrument stretched across a wooden box. He plucks, shifts a bridge, plucks again, and explains how the ratios of string length create harmony. You're amazed for a moment, until you realize he expects you to memorize the relationships. Medieval students don't get Spotify playlists, they get number charts of pitch intervals. Still, there's beauty here. When you chant psalms in choir, you feel the geometry of music sinking into you, the way voices rise and fall in measured order, the way harmony makes even hunger feel distant. Sometimes, you almost forget the discipline. You just let the sound carry you. Then, of course, your neighbor forgets a line and the master's rod cracks down on the table, reminding everyone that beauty and order require obedience. Finally, you reach astronomy, the most dazzling and the most confusing. You study the heavens, not through telescopes, but through charts, diagrams, and the writings of Ptolemy. The Earth is the center, the sun and planets and stars all wheeling around in perfect crystalline spheres. You learn to name constellations, to track the movement of the sun, to predict eclipses and seasons. The stars are not merely distant fires, they are clocks, calendars, and sometimes whispers of divine intention. The master holds up an astrolabe, a brass disc inscribed with lines and circles. He shows how it can measure the height of a star, how it can tell the time of night, even how it can help calculate the date of Easter. You try to follow the arcs, the angles, the sliding plates. Mostly, you gape in awe. For a boy who rarely steps beyond the monastery walls, this feels like holding the universe in your hands. But don't mistake awe for ease. The quadrivium is designed to grind you. Arithmetic burns your patience. Geometry blurs your sight. Music tangles your ears, and astronomy stretches your imagination beyond what your mind can hold. You shift on your bench, cramped and stiff, and wonder if this is what monks mean when they talk about the narrow path to salvation. Narrow indeed, like squeezing your brain through a keyhole. Still, there's a strange rhythm to it. As the days pass, you see the subjects intertwine. Arithmetic's numbers echo in geometry's shapes. Geometry's lines ripple into music's harmonies. Music's ratios mirror the motions of the heavens in astronomy. Each subject a reflection of the other, each leading back to the divine source. You start to see why the quadrivium is revered. It's not about practical skill alone, it's about glimpsing the architecture of creation itself. Your classmates groan and whisper as lessons drag on. One boy complains that he'll never need to measure a cathedral wall. Another jokes that music is only good for lulling him back to sleep. You stifle a laugh, but know better than to say it aloud. The master's ears are sharper than you think. One wrong word and he'll assign you to copy out the entire book of Psalms as punishment. And in case you're wondering, that's 150 Psalms, by hand, on parchment. Your fingers would never forgive you. Sometimes, though, you do catch glimpses of joy. When the choir nails a perfect harmony during evening prayers, the quadrivium's theory of music feels alive. When you trace a circle and realize its proportions line up with the monastery's rose window, geometry suddenly seems practical. When the night sky glitters above the cloister garden and you recognize Orion's belt or the Arc of Cassiopeia, astronomy feels less abstract and more like a secret shared between you and the stars. The day ends with Compline, the final prayer service. The quadrivium echoes through it all. Numbers in the counting of psalms, geometry in the vaulted arches above, music in the chant of the monks, astronomy in the moonlight, streaming through the high windows. It's overwhelming, exhausting, and yes, more than a little absurd at times. But in this medieval school, the quadrivium is your ladder to heaven. You may slip, stumble, or even fall asleep halfway up, but you climb it nonetheless. One number, one note, one star at a time. And when you finally sink back into your straw bed, your mind is a whirl of equations, shapes, chants, and constellations. You smile faintly, realizing that somehow, amidst the monotony and the pain, you're beginning to see the universe differently. It's not just chaos anymore, it's a pattern, a song, a design. You don't fully understand it, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, that's the point. The morning bell tolls again, and your bones protest as you climb from your straw mattress. Your head is still filled with numbers, circles, chants and constellations from yesterday's quadrivium gauntlet. But today the master insists. You will turn back to the most relentless task of all, Latin. The air in the classroom smells of ink and oil lamps. Wax tablets clatter onto wooden benches. Boys rub their eyes, straighten their backs and brace themselves. Because here, in medieval schools, learning Latin isn't just a subject, it's survival. You shuffle into place holding your tablet and stylus like a soldier gripping a shield. The master doesn't waste words. He begins immediately, reciting from memory, in principio erat verbum, et verbum erat apud doum, et dous erat verbum. You repeat in unison with your classmates. The words echo off the cold stone walls. You don't even pause to consider the meaning. That comes later. First, you memorize. Memory is king here. Your mind is trained like a muscle, forced to hold words the way your lungs hold air. It's not glamorous. You chant endings until your tongue feels numb. Rosa, 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 the declensions of the word rose. After the 5th repetition, you hate roses. By the 10th, you imagine hurling a real rose at the master's head. By the 20th, the rose feels tattooed inside your skull. This is the medieval reality, brute force memorization until the words bleed into you. Your master is merciless. He dictates passages from the Vulgate Bible, and you're expected to repeat them flawlessly. Any stumble, any hesitation, and he slaps his rod across the desk, the sound echoing like thunder. You jump every time. It's not only fear of pain, it's fear of shame. To fail Latin is to prove yourself unworthy of learning, and in a world where education belongs almost entirely to the church, being unworthy means being excluded. You may as well go back to the fields, so you push on. Latin isn't simply a foreign language, it's the only key to scholarship. All sacred texts, all legal documents, all serious correspondence are written in it. The sermons, the psalms, the songs, the very air of the monastery is saturated with Latin. Vernacular tongues, French, English, German, are spoken outside in markets and kitchens, but in here, they're useless. Try speaking them and you'll earn a glare sharp enough to pierce your soul. You start to notice something strange. The more you recite, the more natural the patterns feel. At first, the cases seem like a labyrinth designed to torment you, but slowly, you begin to see their logic. Nominative names the subject, accusative marks the object, genitive shows possession. Each ending has its purpose. Each suffix snaps into place like the gears of a clock. The words stop being nonsense sounds. They become tools. You realize why the masters insist on this torture. Once you master Latin, the world of texts begins to open like a locked chest. Of course, opening that chest comes with splinters. You scratch your stylus across wax again and again, carving the same sentence, Dominus illuminatio mea, the Lord is my light. You erase, rewrite, erase, rewrite, until the grooves in the wax blur. Then you graduate to parchment, and here the stakes rise. Parchment is animal skin, costly, precious. Waste a sheet with sloppy ink blots, and you'll face wrath fiercer than any whip. You dip your quill cautiously, praying the ink doesn't spatter, your hand trembling as you form each letter. Scribes aren't born overnight, they're drilled one shaky line at a time. To make matters harder, the script isn't the neat handwriting you're used to. You must learn the cramped Gothic forms, each letter bristling with flourishes, each stroke demanding precision. You copy, copy, copy until your fingers cramp. If you're lucky, you'll get to trace holy texts. If not, you're stuck practicing the alphabet endlessly, like a medieval punishment loop. Sometimes you wonder if the masters invented Gothic letters specifically to torment you, and then comes translation. The master reads a passage of Cicero or Augustine, and you must render it into the vernacular. The words twist like snakes. A sentence stretches across 3 lines, clauses stacked like tower blocks, verbs hiding at the end like shy children. You stumble, reread, mutter under your breath, until the meaning finally clicks. The process feels like cracking a code. When you succeed, there's a thrill to it, a flash of pride, quickly extinguished by the master's stern reminder that pride is a sin. But despite the hardships, there's magic here too. The first time you manage to understand a psalm without needing help, you feel as though you've been handed a secret. The first time you translate a line of Virgil, you hear the voice of a poet from 1,000 years ago whispering directly into your ear. It's intoxicating, this bridge across time, built from nothing but words. And there's humor in it as well. One boy misdeclines a word so badly that his sentence accidentally praises goats instead of God. The class bursts into stifled laughter, and the master's glare silences it instantly. Another student writes Mater mea, porcus est, my mother is a pig, on his wax tablet when no one's looking. You chuckle silently because humor is the only thing keeping you from going mad with declensions. The pressure never lets up. Vocabulary lists grow longer. Dictation exercises multiply. At meals, monks quiz you with Latin riddles. Quid est quod currit et non habet pedis? What runs but has no feet? The answer, of course, is water. You learn that Latin isn't confined to the classroom. It seeps into every moment of your day. Speak well, and you earn nods of respect. Stumble, and you're corrected with sharp swiftness. The older students, already fluent, wield Latin like a weapon. They debate theology, argue fine points of grammar, trade quotations from poets as casually as modern kids trade memes. You watch them with awe and envy. To speak like that, to wield words so smoothly, feels like power beyond imagining. One day you tell yourself, if you survive the drills, you'll stand among them. It's exhausting, it's merciless, but it's also transformative. Slowly, Latin begins to live inside you. You dream in declensions. You mutter verbs under your breath as you walk through the cloister. You even start thinking in Latin sometimes, only to realize how ridiculous it sounds when you try to explain it in your mother tongue. And yet, it makes sense. The masters weren't exaggerating. Latin isn't just a language here, it's the skeleton of education. Without it, you're nothing. With it, you can unlock scripture, philosophy, law, science. You can step into the wider world of learning. As evening falls, the classroom grows dim. The master closes with another recitation, his voice echoing, verba volant, scripta manent. Spoken words fly away, written words remain. You copy it down carefully. Your hand aches, your mind aches, but somewhere deep inside you feel a spark of pride. You survived another day of Latin, barely, and tomorrow you'll do it all over again, because in medieval schools, Latin isn't optional. It's the air you breathe, the food you eat, the very ground beneath your feet, and you probably won't survive without it. The winter air cuts sharply through the cloister as the bell tolls for prime, the early morning office, and you drag yourself toward another long day. Your stomach still groans from yesterday's thin stew, but your master's glare is hungrier than you are. Today, though, the focus shifts, not on Latin itself, but on how every waking moment of a schoolboy in these centuries is measured, disciplined, and broken into a rhythm as predictable as the tolling of bells. This is the daily school routine, and you are about to live it from dawn until dusk, with no recess, no sports, no sympathetic mental health day, just prayers, chanting, writing, and a cycle of discipline that leaves little room for anything else. You wake before dawn, called by the sound of matins, the midnight prayers. Though your eyes barely stay open, sleep is short, because the monastery is not designed for comfort. You lie on a straw mattress crawling with fleas, wrapped in a rough wool blanket that smells faintly of smoke and sweat. You rub your eyes and whisper a prayer, because every day begins with prayer. Without it, your master reminds you, you risk losing not only your lessons, but your soul. At Lord's, the dawn prayer, the chapel glows with candlelight, cold stone echoing the chant of monks. Your voice joins in, thin but steady. The sound is haunting, and sometimes, even as exhaustion presses down on you, you feel carried by it. You file out in silence, the frost biting your nose, and head straight into lessons. Breakfast? Forget it. Food waits. Knowledge comes first. The classroom is austere. Wooden benches, rough tables, parchment and wax tablets scattered about, and the ever-present master standing like a sentinel at the front. He begins with a prayer, because every lesson, no matter the subject, is offered to God. Then the work begins. The first hours are for review, repetition of yesterday's material. You chant declensions, recite psalms, copy lines of Latin. The monotony is numbing, but the idea is clear. Discipline makes memory permanent. When mistakes are made, and they always are, the punishments come swiftly. A slap with the rod across the palms, a cuff on the ear, or kneeling on cold stone while reciting prayers aloud. There is no tolerance for laziness, no gentle encouragement. Medieval schooling assumes you are weak and sinful, and only through correction can you improve. You shift uncomfortably on your bench, hoping today the rod finds someone else's knuckles. By mid-morning, the lessons shift to grammar or rhetoric. Your master dictates lines from scripture, Virgil or Augustine, and you scratch them onto your tablet, careful not to smear the wax. The room is a chorus of murmurs as boys mutter declensions under their breath, trying to keep pace. The master prowls between benches, eyes sharp, ready to strike down any whisper not devoted to learning. Even the smallest hint of distraction is dangerous. Around noon, the bell rings for sext, midday prayers. You file into the chapel again. Kneel, chant, bow. Your stomach growls audibly, but you ignore it. Hunger is part of discipline. Only after sext do you finally eat a simple meal of bread, beans, and watered ale. If it's a feast day, maybe fish, always eaten in silence, because one monk stands at a lectern reading from scripture while you chew. Even meals are lessons. Conversation is forbidden. Listening is compulsory. After dinner, lunch, in modern terms, the lessons resume. Now it might be arithmetic or geometry, with endless scratching of numbers and shapes on tablets, or music, with chants echoing through the hall. Sometimes astronomy, with diagrams of stars. The subjects rotate, but the discipline never wavers. Your body aches from sitting so long, your fingers ache from writing, your throat aches from reciting. But still, the master presses on. You have no clock, but you know the rhythm of the hours by the bells. The afternoons are the hardest. Sleepiness weighs heavy, and your eyes droop. That's when the master strikes the desk with his rod. The crack like thunder, jolting everyone awake. Falling asleep in class is one of the worst offences. It shows not only laziness but disrespect to God. So you pinch yourself, rub your eyes, mutter declensions louder than before. Anything to stay conscious. Coffee hasn't been invented yet. All you have is fear. When the bell rings for none, the mid-afternoon prayers, you feel a rush of relief. Another break from the grind, though it's hardly restful. More chanting, more kneeling, more cold stone under your knees. But at least you can stretch your legs as you walk to chapel and back. After prayers, the lessons continue until vespers, just before sunset. That's when the day's formal teaching ends. But not your work. You are often assigned copying tasks, scribbling lines of scripture, or rehearsing tomorrow's passages. Your hand cramps, your eyes blur, but you dare not stop. Finally, Compline, the evening prayers, closes the day. Darkness has fallen, the monastery lit only by dim candles. You shuffle back to your bed, your body exhausted, your mind still humming with chants and declensions. The day ends as it began, with prayer. You collapse onto the straw, scratching at fleas, and drift into uneasy sleep. Tomorrow, the cycle will repeat, as predictable as the sunrise. There's no room for childhood here. No games, no laughter except whispered jokes between punishments. You live in a world where discipline is survival, where memory is everything, and where every breath is wrapped in Latin prayers. The daily routine may feel like a prison, but it forges you into something different, a mind sharper than those who never set foot inside these stone walls. To a modern eye, it seems unbearable. Imagine telling a student today that their school day will begin before dawn, with chanting continue with endless memorization, involve regular physical punishments, and allow no free play. They'd revolt before the first bell. You probably wouldn't survive either. Not without snacks, recess, and maybe a sympathetic teacher who smiles once in a while. But in the medieval school, sympathy is rare, and snacks rarer. Discipline is everything, and yet the routine works. Year after year, the boys who endure it emerge fluent in Latin, versed in the Trivium and Quadrivium, able to argue, preach, and write with authority. They become priests, scribes, lawyers, even advisors to kings. The monotony, the hunger, the fear, these are the costs of that transformation. You may complain about the bruises and the boredom, but without them, you would never climb the ladder of learning. The routine isn't just about teaching you knowledge, it's about breaking you down, shaping your habits, molding your soul. Every bell, every chant, every punishment is designed to remind you that you are not your own master. The church is your master. God is your master. The word is your master. And in that submission, medieval schools believe, lies the path to true wisdom. So you fall asleep once more, the cycle imprinted on you like the grooves of your wax tablet. Tomorrow the bell will ring again, and you'll rise to repeat it all. Because in medieval times, education isn't a journey you choose, It's a discipline you endure. The next morning comes with the chill of damp stone under your bare feet and the heavy toll of the monastery bell vibrating through the cloisters. Your body feels battered, not from sport or play, but from sitting too long on wooden benches, copying too many lines of Latin, and reciting until your throat turned raw. But today, as you drag yourself into the narrow classroom, your master announces a subject that makes every boy straighten instantly. Discipline, and not the abstract, self-improvement sort you imagine today, but the sharp, stinging, humbling discipline of punishments that defines the medieval schoolroom. If you thought your teacher's red pen was harsh, wait until you meet a birch rod. It leans casually against the master's desk, but everyone knows it's more important than any textbook. The rod is the backbone of order, the unspoken threat keeping restless boys in line. The mere sight of it quiets whispers, straightens spines, and silences giggles. It's a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. And yes, if you're unlucky, it becomes very physical. The punishments vary in form, but they share one goal: correction. The most common is the beating of palms with the rod. You hold out your hands trembling while the master strikes. The sting lingers for hours, and writing afterward feels like dragging your fingers through fire. But the lesson sticks, literally. Miss a declension once, and you'll think twice before forgetting it again. Other times, it's a cuff to the ear, sharp, sudden, humiliating, or kneeling on cold flagstones for an hour while reciting psalms. Your knees ache, your back bends, and your voice cracks as you try to keep up the chant. Everyone else continues with lessons, glancing sideways at you with a mix of pity and relief. It's not their turn today. You wonder if your punishment is more about pain or about making an example. Probably both. And then there are the harsher corrections. A boy caught whispering during dictation may be made to stand in the corner, arms raised high, holding a heavy book, until his muscles scream. Another who falls asleep during prayers might be ordered to stand outside barefoot in the cold, whispering penitential psalms until he shakes from both shame and frost. The medieval system doesn't bother with timeouts or gentle counseling. It assumes the body must be humbled to discipline the soul. You probably wouldn't survive this system. Imagine being whacked with a stick every time you forgot homework, or being forced to kneel in the snow for texting in class. Today, it would be called abuse. Back then, it was called education. And yet, strangely, the boys accept it. They grumble, they fear, they joke about it under their breath, but they don't question it. To them, punishment is as natural as prayers. They've grown up with parents who used rods, priests who preached obedience, and a society that believes correction saves souls. Pain isn't cruelty here. It's medicine. A bitter cure for the sickness of laziness, pride, or disobedience. The master himself sees it this way. He doesn't beat with rage, at least. Not usually. He strikes with solemnity, almost ritual, as though the rod itself is an extension of God's will. Whom the Lord loves, he chastises, he quotes. And the class nods, even as someone rubs their sore hands under the bench. In this worldview, to be corrected is to be loved. To escape punishment entirely is to risk being left adrift in sin. It's twisted logic, but it shapes generations. Discipline isn't just physical, it's intellectual. Forget your lines, and you may be ordered to copy them 100 times until the grooves in your wax tablet wear thin. Mispronounce a psalm, and you repeat it aloud, again and again, until your throat burns. Fail to memorize a grammar rule, and you're told to recite it before every meal for a week. Shame, repetition, pain, they all weave together as tools to shape memory. There's also public shaming. A boy who makes repeated mistakes might be forced to wear a dunce-like cap, or to stand before the class with a sign of his fault, lazy or proud. Humiliation cuts deeper than the rod. You blush, you lower your head, and you swear never to stumble again. It's cruel, but effective. And of course, the discipline extends beyond the classroom. In the dormitory, talking after lights out might earn a punishment at dawn. Skipping prayers is nearly unthinkable, but if it happens, the boy may be denied food for a day. Even laughter in the wrong place can bring consequences. The monastery is a world where control is total, and school is the sharpest edge of it. But there's a paradox here. As much as you dread the rod, you start to see its strange power. It forces you to focus when your mind drifts. It burns lessons into you with unforgettable clarity. You don't just learn Latin, you learn obedience, humility, endurance. It's not the education you would choose, but it's the one that shapes medieval scholars into men who can withstand endless hours of study, debate, and writing without faltering. The boys whispered jokes about punishments when the master's back is turned. "Better the rod on your hands than on your stomach," one mutters, meaning it's easier to endure beatings than go without food. Another carves a crude doodle of the rod into his wax tablet, labeling it the true teacher. You stifle a laugh, because humor is your only rebellion. But when the master approaches, silence falls again, rods and rods alone ruling the air. Sometimes, you wonder if all this pain dulls or sharpens you. Your palms are swollen, your knees bruised, your pride battered, and yet, when you recite a psalm perfectly, when you decline a noun without hesitation, when you translate a line of Virgil flawlessly, you feel a spark of pride hidden beneath the humiliation. The punishment may break your body, but it forges your mind. At least, that's what the masters believe. As the day winds toward Vespers, you kneel again in the chapel, the candlelight flickering on worn stone. Your hands throb from the rod, your throat aches from repetition, but you chant steadily. The punishments have left their mark on your skin, on your memory, on your soul. You glance at the other boys, their faces pale and tired, and realize they are marked too. Together you are being shaped, not gently, but with fire and iron. Would you trade it for freedom, for laughter and games, for soft teachers and kind words? Of course you would, at least you think so. But in the medieval world, no one asks. Discipline isn't an option. It's the air you breathe, the walls that surround you, the rod that waits by the master's desk. And tomorrow, when the bell tolls again, you'll return to the bench, wax tablet in hand, ready or not to endure it once more. The morning light spills pale across the cloister garden, and the sound of sandals scuffing stone fills the air. You drag yourself to the classroom again, body stiff from yesterday's beatings, but today's focus is different. Today isn't about what you learn, but who teaches you. The figure waiting at the front of the room, rod in hand, and eyes sharp as a hawk's, is more than a simple instructor. He is the schoolmaster, the living embodiment of authority, knowledge, and discipline in the medieval school. Without him, the entire structure collapses. With him, it thrives, or suffocates you, depending on the day. You sit on your bench and study him, because to understand the medieval school, you must understand the man in charge. He's a cleric, usually a monk or a priest. Sometimes he's a scholar trained at a cathedral school or even a university, but most often he's a man who has risen through the church, steeped in Latin, scripture, and the art of teaching, or rather drilling. His cassock hangs loose around his thin frame, his tonsured head glistens faintly in the dim light, and his rod rests like a second limb against his desk. His authority is absolute. He doesn't plead with you to pay attention, he commands it. The role of the schoolmaster isn't glamorous. His job is to shape raw boys into literate, disciplined servants of the church. He lives in the same cold stone as you, eats the same simple food, rises at the same bells, but he holds power, because he is the gatekeeper of knowledge. He decides who advances, who stalls, who fails. His approval can open doors to higher learning, positions in cathedrals, even influence with nobles. His disapproval can slam those doors forever. In some ways, he's terrifying. His gaze alone silences chatter. His rod enforces obedience. His corrections are sharp, sometimes humiliating, always final. You whisper the wrong declension, and he's on you instantly, forcing you to repeat until your voice cracks. You forget a psalm, and he assigns you hours of copying. He's not here to be liked. He's here to ensure that Latin and scripture carve themselves into your bones. But there's another side, subtle and rare. When a boy recites flawlessly, when a translation shines, when a voice in the choir rises clear and strong, you catch a flicker in his eyes. Approval, pride even. He may not smile, but the brief nod he gives feels worth more than gold. Because in this world, the schoolmaster's praise is scarce, and therefore priceless. His authority isn't limited to the classroom. He governs your behavior in the dormitory, in the refectory, in the chapel. Whispering at meals? He notices. Laughing in prayers? He punishes. The master is everywhere, his presence looming like a shadow across your day. Sometimes you joke with your classmates that he can see through walls, that he knows your sins before you confess them. The thought isn't entirely a joke. Where does his power come from? Partly from the church, which grants him authority, but partly from knowledge itself. He knows Latin, he knows scripture, he knows the poets and the philosophers. To you he seems like a walking library, a man whose mind holds the words of ages, when he quotes Virgil by heart, when he unravels Augustine's theology, when he explains the stars as though he's touched them. You realize he possesses something no rod can enforce, awe. Still, awe doesn't erase fear. You live in constant tension, respect for his learning, dread of his punishments, dependence on his approval. It's a strange relationship, equal parts admiration and resentment. You sometimes dream of defying him, of throwing your tablet across the room and running out to the fields. But when you look up and see his stern face, you stay seated. The cost of rebellion is too high. The schoolmaster's own life isn't easy. He is often poorly paid, relying on the church or wealthy patrons for support. He copies texts by candlelight, his eyes strained, his fingers ink-stained. He disciplines not only you but himself, holding to the same rigid schedule, the same endless prayers. Some masters burn out, their tempers fraying, their patience gone. Others grow cold, distant, mechanical in their teaching. But the best, the rarest, still carry a spark. They believe in the power of words to shape souls, and when you glimpse that spark, even for a moment, you realize why they endure. Your classmates talk about him in whispers. Some hate him, calling him cruel, unyielding, even sadistic. Others revere him, dreaming of becoming masters themselves. One boy swears the master once debated a bishop, and won. Another claims he wrote letters for a king. Whether true or not, these stories magnify his authority. To you, he feels untouchable, a figure larger than life. And yet, there are small moments that humanize him. When his voice cracks from too much recitation, when his hand trembles slightly as he writes, when he rubs his eyes after hours of candlelight, you realize he's as weary as you are. He's bound by the same system, the same relentless discipline. Perhaps he punishes harshly because he himself was punished harshly. Perhaps his rod is the echo of his own schooling. By the time the bell rings for sext, you've spent hours under his gaze. Your hands sting from his corrections, your voice aches from chanting, but you've also glimpsed the strange balance he holds. Fear and knowledge, punishment and praise. Rod and book. Without him, the classroom would dissolve into chaos. With him, it becomes an engine, grinding boys into scholars, whether they like it or not. After the meal, silent of course with a monk reading scripture, you return for more lessons. The master dictates passages from Priscian, the great grammarian, and you copy furiously, every stroke of your quill echoing his authority. He explains a difficult passage, and though half the class looks bewildered, you catch a glimmer of understanding. For a moment it feels like he's handing you a key, unlocking a door in your mind. It's fleeting, but it's enough to remind you why you endure the beatings, the boredom, the endless drills. Knowledge is power, and the master is the one who bestows it. As the sun dips low and Vespers approaches, you watch him gather his books and rod. He walks slowly, shoulders stooped, eyes tired. For all his authority, he is still a man, bound by the same stone walls, the same cold air, the same cycle of prayers. You wonder if he ever dreamed of another life, freedom, laughter, warmth, or if, like you, he simply endured until the system shaped him into what he is now. That night, lying on your straw bed, you think of him, the schoolmaster, stern, punishing, brilliant, weary. You hate him and admire him at once. Without him, you'd still be illiterate, still wandering the fields with no knowledge of Latin, no glimpse of the stars, no voice in the choir. With him, you are bruised, humbled, but slowly, steadily becoming something more. Perhaps that is the true paradox of medieval education. The rod hurts, the routine exhausts, the master terrifies, but through it all, he teaches, and tomorrow, when the bell tolls again, you'll rise, ready or not to face him once more. The morning light creeps through slits in the shutters, catching motes of dust that dance above the desks. The benches creak under the weight of tired boys, and you drop heavily into your place, clutching your wax tablet like an old friend. But today, the master points not to his rod, nor to the Psalms. He gestures toward the small stack of tools that lie at the heart of medieval learning. Slates, wax tablets, parchment, quills, and ink. This day belongs not to words themselves, but to the instruments by which they are born and preserved. For in the medieval schoolroom, your education is inseparable from the physical struggle of writing, copying, and guarding precious materials. You discover that learning here is not abstract. It is hard labor for the hands as much as the mind. Your first tool is the wax tablet. It's nothing glamorous, just two small wooden frames, each with a hollow carved into it, filled with dark beeswax. You grip your stylus, a thin stick of bone or metal, sharpened to a point at one end and flattened at the other. With the sharp end, you scratch letters into the wax, the grooves catching the faint light. With the flat end, you smooth the surface again, erasing mistakes. It is both fragile and reusable, a cheap solution for endless practice. You and your classmates carve declensions and psalms over and over, scratching, erasing, scratching again. The wax bears scars of your struggles, faint traces that never fully vanish. Sometimes you imagine that the wax remembers everything you've written, a ghostly archive of all your mistakes. The wax tablet, though, is only for practice. When the master wants permanence, he demands parchment. Here the stakes rise sharply, because parchment is precious animal skin stretched, scraped, washed and dried until they become smooth sheets ready to hold ink. Each sheet is the product of labor and slaughter, and wasting one is a sin as much as a blunder. When the master hands you parchment, your hands sweat. You dip your quill into ink, trembling, terrified of blotting the page. The quill pen is itself a challenge. You strip a feather, usually from a goose, trim the shaft, and cut the nib with a knife until it's sharp enough to slice skin. Dip it into ink made from oak galls, iron salts and gum arabic, a mixture so dark it stains everything it touches. Then you write, gently, carefully, pulling the quill across parchment with steady pressure. Too much ink, and the letters bleed. Too little, and they fade. Too much pressure, and you rip the parchment. Too little, and the words vanish. Each stroke feels like walking a tightrope between disaster and success. Your letters must follow the script of the day, Caroline minuscule. If you're lucky, Gothic script if you're cursed. The Gothic hand is tight, cramped, filled with loops and flourishes. Every M looks like a row of spikes, every U like a V, and every S like a Theth. You squint, your hand cramps, your wrist aches, but you continue, because neatness is not a luxury, it is survival. A sloppy page may mean hours of rewriting, or worse, punishment for wasting precious skin. Mistakes are not easily forgiven. If you blot ink, you take a knife and scrape it away, carefully, praying you don't cut too deep. If you write a wrong word, you cross it with faint dots, hoping it passes unnoticed. Every page you complete is both triumph and torment. Sometimes you long for the simplicity of the wax tablet, where mistakes can vanish with a sweep. But parchment is forever. Written words remain. The classroom itself hums with the sound of scribes at work, the scratch of quills, the mutter of boys reciting as they write, the occasional sharp tap of the master's rod when someone hesitates. The air smells of wax, ink, and the faint tang of scraped hide. Your fingers are perpetually stained black, your nails ragged from scraping errors. The physical strain of writing is as much a test as the mental strain of memorization. Books are rare and costly. The school owns only a handful: copies of the Bible, a grammar by Priscian, perhaps a Psalter, a few scraps of Cicero or Boethius. These are chained to lecterns or guarded in cupboards. To learn, you must copy them by hand, line after line. The master reads aloud, and you write, your hand chasing his words like a hound after prey. Dictation is fast, merciless, and prone to error. One slip of the ear, and your entire page is wrong. The master notices, he always notices. Sometimes, the monotony breaks. A boy draws a doodle in the margin, a crude face, a funny animal, a parody of the master himself. You stifle laughter, but the doodles remain, a secret rebellion hidden among holy texts. Centuries later, scholars will marvel at them. For you, they are small acts of survival. Slates also appear in the schoolroom, thin pieces of stone on which you scratch with chalk or lead. They are heavier than wax tablets, but sturdier. Mistakes can be wiped with water, though faint traces remain. They are useful for arithmetic, when numbers run wild and wax smears too easily. Still, the weight of the slate digs into your knees as you balance it, and the chalk dust clings to your fingers. Every tool carries its own burdens. Wax tablets smear in the heat, parchment tears under clumsy hands, ink spills ruin weeks of work, slates crack if dropped. Learning is a physical battle against fragile materials, as much as a mental struggle with words and numbers. You envy the future. Paper pencils, printing presses, but here in the medieval classroom every letter costs sweat. And then there are the manuscripts themselves. When the schoolmaster shows you a finished book, bound in wooden boards and leather, illuminated with gold leaf and painted saints, you stare in awe. Each page is perfect, letters like soldiers on parade, margins filled with vines and beasts. It's not just a book, it's a miracle of human labor. You realize that the hours you spend hunched over parchment are part of something greater. You are not merely practicing, you are contributing to the slow, fragile survival of knowledge itself. The master reminds you of this constantly. Books are rarer than gold, he says, tapping the chained Bible. Without them, the word is lost. Without your hands, books vanish. His words hang heavy in the air. You shift uncomfortably, because suddenly your cramped handwriting feels like a sacred duty. Each stroke of your quill isn't just practice, it's preservation. Yet, the duty comes with endless fatigue. Your back aches from leaning, your eyes strain from candlelight, your fingers cramp until you drop the quill. Sometimes you nod off, your face dangerously close to wet ink. A boy beside you snores softly until the rod cracks across his desk, jolting him awake. The master allows no excuses. Pain, fatigue, hunger. It doesn't matter. The parchment must be filled. The words must endure. By evening, when the bell calls for vespers, your hands are stiff, your eyes blurred. You shuffle into chapel, ink still staining your fingers, wax flakes clinging to your sleeves. As you chant the psalms, the letters you copied echo in your mind, merging with the words spilling from your mouth. The act of writing, reading, and praying becomes inseparable. Knowledge and devotion are one. When you finally collapse onto your straw mattress, you still feel the phantom weight of the stylus and quill in your hand. You dream of endless lines of letters, stretching across parchment like chains, binding you to the page. You wonder if you'll ever escape them, but then you recall the illuminated book, its golden saints gleaming in candlelight, and a strange pride warms you. Perhaps one day, your words too will survive, chained to a lectern, whispered by voices centuries from now. That thought carries you into uneasy sleep, your fingers twitching as though still holding the quill. Tomorrow, the tools will wait again. Wax, slate, parchment, quill, and you will scratch, scrape, stain and struggle once more. Because in medieval schools, learning is as much about ink and hide as it is about the mind. The bells call you once more, dragging you from restless dreams into the biting chill of the cloister. Your fingers still ache from yesterday's endless scratching with quills and styluses, but there's no time for complaint. Today, your master announces, the lesson is not about tools or punishments, but about a shift in where and how learning takes place. For centuries, monasteries were the heart of education, but now, as towns grow and bishops wield increasing power, another institution rises to prominence, the cathedral school. You shuffle into your place, but your mind is pulled beyond these stone walls, into the bustling city, where the cathedral towers like a mountain of faith. Unlike the quiet cloister, where monks pace in silence, the cathedral hums with life. Merchants calling, pilgrims arriving, bells ringing, choirs singing. The air is thick with incense, and the smell of roasted meat from nearby stalls. You realize that education is no longer confined to hidden cloisters. It has stepped into the center of civic and spiritual life. In the early centuries, Monasteries taught primarily future monks, but cathedral schools, attached to great churches in urban centres, open their doors wider. They still focus on training clergy, but they also draw sons of nobles, wealthy merchants, and ambitious families who see education as a ladder to status. Imagine stepping from the quiet cloister classroom into a school attached to Notre Dame in Paris or Chartres. The contrast is dizzying. The curriculum is still the same: Trivium and Quadrivium. You memorize grammar, debate rhetoric, wrestle with logic, and eventually climb into arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Latin still rules. Punishment still sting. Discipline still dominates. But in cathedral schools, the environment feels sharper, hungrier. Boys compete more fiercely, eager to prove themselves. Families expect results, for education here can lead not only to priesthood, but to positions in courts, chanceries, and universities. The teachers are canons or clerics attached to the cathedral. They are often better connected than the monks, some even scholars of renown. Their classrooms are less secluded, sometimes held in side chapels, cloisters, or small halls buzzing with noise from the city outside. You can hear bells ringing, merchants shouting, children playing, the sacred and the secular press close together. It feels less like an isolated monastery and more like the beating heart of medieval society. Your day in a cathedral school follows a rhythm similar to the monastery: prayers, chanting, lessons, dictation. But the scale is larger. More boys crowd the benches. Some are noble-born, their fine cloaks contrasting with your coarse wool. Others are poorer scholars, supported by charity, their eyes hungry for knowledge. The mix creates tension, competition, even fights. Whispers spread of rivalries, of older boys hazing the younger, of cliques forming by social rank. The master's rod works overtime to keep order. The atmosphere is ambitious. You hear boys boasting about positions their families hope they'll gain: canonries, secretarial posts, even bishoprics. Some dream of becoming lawyers or physicians. For cathedral schools are the stepping stones to such careers. The hunger in their voices feels different from the monastic classroom, where the aim was holiness. Here, education smells faintly of power. Still, holiness frames everything. The cathedral looms above, its stained glass casting coloured light across your desk. Lessons pause for mass. Choir practice fills your afternoons, the soaring chant echoing through vaults so high they feel like the heavens themselves. You're reminded that even amid ambition, the school's foundation is sacred. Without devotion, knowledge is seen as dangerous, even sinful. But cathedral schools bring change in method too. Teachers here are more likely to use questioning, debate, and disputation. Instead of merely chanting after the master, you may be asked to defend a point, to argue a case, to challenge a peer. The seeds of scholasticism are sprouting. This rigorous logical method that will one day define universities. You feel the difference. Instead of parroting blindly, you are pushed to think, to reason, to persuade. It's exhausting but exhilarating. You realize education is shifting from memorization toward analysis. Books, though still rare, are slightly more accessible in cathedral schools. Scribes copy texts not only for monks but for a growing body of students. You might glimpse Aristotle, Cicero, Boethius, Augustine. The range of voices expands. The city itself feeds the hunger. Merchants bring manuscripts, travelers carry ideas, debates spill into taverns and marketplaces. Knowledge begins to feel less like a cloistered secret and more like a commodity passing through busy hands. And with that comes tension. Some monks sneer at cathedral schools, accusing them of pride, worldliness, and corruption. They say cathedral masters care more for wealth than piety, more for fame than truth. Cathedral masters fire back, calling monasteries backward, too focused on chanting and copying to embrace real thought. The rivalry sharpens both sides. You, as a student, are caught in the middle, torn between awe at the cathedral's grandeur and longing for the monastery's quiet focus. Your daily routine reflects this tug. In the morning, you rise for prayers as always, but instead of walking silent cloisters, you dodge carts and beggars in crowded streets to reach the school. In class, you chant Latin, but the noise of the city seeps through the walls. Horses' hooves, vendors' cries, bells clanging. At midday, you eat in communal halls rather than silent refectories, sometimes sneaking a laugh or a whispered joke before the master's glare restores silence. In the afternoon, disputations ignite. Boys shout arguments about scripture, grammar, logic, each desperate to outshine the other. The classroom feels like an arena, your wax tablet a shield, your words weapons. The punishments remain. The rod still cracks, hands still sting, humiliation still bites. But here, shame comes not only from failure before the master, but from losing before your peers. The boy who stumbles in debate is mocked mercilessly afterward, his pride cut deeper than his palms. You learn quickly that cathedral schools forge not only memory but competition. Still, there are moments of wonder when the choir sings in the cathedral nave, voices soaring under vaulted ceilings. You feel lifted beyond yourself. When the master explains Aristotle's logic, you glimpse patterns in the world you never imagined. When sunlight strikes stained glass and floods your desk in red and blue, you feel that learning is not only toil, but beauty. The cathedral school is exhausting, demanding, sometimes brutal, but it is also alive in a way the cloister is not. It pulses with ambition, competition, debate, and the buzz of the city. You sense that the world of learning is expanding, that education is no longer the hidden domain of monks, but the public arena of towns and cathedrals. You realize that from here, something even larger will grow. As evening falls, you walk home through crowded streets, your ears still ringing from disputations, your hands ink-stained, your stomach hollow, the cathedral towers behind you, its bells tolling, its windows glowing like jewels in the dusk. You know that tomorrow the rod will sting again, the arguments will flare again, the chants will drone again, but you also know that within these stone walls, something new is being born. A wider, hungrier, sharper education that will soon spill into universities, shaping not just boys like you, but the very course of Europe. You fall asleep with that thought in your mind. Cathedral schools are not the end, but the bridge, and you, weary as you are walking across it. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the hunger for learning has grown too large to be contained by monasteries or cathedral schools. Boys who have mastered grammar, rhetoric, and logic crave more. Families who can afford it want their sons trained not only in scripture but in law, medicine, and philosophy. The towns themselves swell with students, clerics, and teachers. From this crucible emerges a new institution, the Universitas, a guild of masters and scholars bound together in pursuit of knowledge. You can feel the difference the moment you enter. This is not a single classroom under a stern master. This is a whole city within a city, buzzing with scholars, students, booksellers, scribes, tavern keepers, and landlords who see opportunity in the swelling numbers of young men flooding their streets. In Bologna, in Paris, in Oxford, the universities take shape, not as buildings at first, but as communities of people masters who teach, students who learn, townsfolk who profit, bishops and popes who regulate. The first thing you notice is scale. In a monastery, perhaps a dozen boys learn together. In a cathedral school, maybe several dozen. But in a university, hundreds gather. Streets overflow with cloaks of scholars, each bearing ink-stained hands, each debating loudly in Latin. You hear arguments on every corner about Aristotle, Augustine, medicine, the law of Justinian. The noise is constant, the energy feverish. To step into a medieval university is to be swept into a current of thought and ambition, unlike anything you've known. The curriculum is broader too. You begin, as always, with the liberal arts, Trivium and Quadrivium, but here they are just the gateway. Beyond them lie higher faculties, theology, law, medicine. Theology reigns supreme, the queen of the sciences, demanding years of study, disputation and commentary. Law, particularly Roman and canon law, flourishes in Bologna, where students pore over Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilius until their eyes blur. Medicine grows in places like Salerno, drawing on ancient Greek texts and Arabic translations. The range of knowledge feels infinite, terrifying, exhilarating. Teaching itself has evolved. No longer do you sit silently while the master dictates. Instead, you attend lectures, readings of authoritative texts, line by line with commentary. The master reads from Aristotle or Lombard's sentences, pausing to explain, gloss and elaborate. You sit on hard benches in crowded halls, copying furiously, straining to catch every word. The room hums with quills scratching parchment. Sometimes you curse your slow hand, for if you miss a phrase it may take weeks to piece it together again. And then there are the disputations. These are public debates, formal contests of intellect where questions are posed and argued. Is the soul immortal? Can faith and reason be reconciled? Does universality exist outside the mind? The master presides. Students argue. Objections fly. Responses counter. It is a battle of words, logic and courage. Your heart races as you imagine being called to the floor, your Latin faltering, your mind scrambling. Some thrive here, their voices rising sharp and confident. Others crumble, mocked and jeered. Disputation is brutal, but it is also electrifying. It is education turned into spectacle. The organization of universities is unlike anything before. They are guilds, not of weavers or bakers, but of scholars. In Bologna, the students themselves form the universitas, hiring masters, setting fees, even punishing those who fail to teach well. In Paris, the masters dominate, forming their own guild, controlling curricula, defending privileges against town and crown. Oxford, caught between students and townsfolk, erupts in riots, its scholars clashing with citizens, its halls echoing with both chants and blows. The university is not a serene cloister. It is a battlefield of rights, privileges, and power. The life of a student here is chaotic. You rent a small, drafty room in town, paying high fees to landlords who eye you with suspicion. Meals are meager, money scarce, debts constant. You survive on bread, ale, and scraps, sometimes pawning your cloak for parchment. Yet amid the hunger and cold, your mind feasts. You argue late into the night in smoky taverns, quills scratching over ale-stained tables, your friends bickering about Aristotle's categories as though their lives depend on it. Discipline is looser than in monasteries, but not absent. Masters still wield rods when needed, though older students bristle at such treatment. The church oversees, demanding orthodoxy, threatening excommunication for heresy. Heresy is no small danger. To wander too far from accepted doctrine risks not just expulsion, but trial. You walk a tightrope between curiosity and obedience, daring to probe questions while knowing the limits of tolerance. And yet, within these limits, the intellectual world blooms. Translations of Arabic and Greek texts flood into Europe, carried from Spain, Sicily, and the East. You read Aristotle's physics, Galen's medicine, Euclid's geometry, Ptolemy's astronomy, works unknown for centuries. The sheer breadth of knowledge staggers you. For the first time, education feels global, stretching from Athens to Baghdad to Paris. You realize you are part of something larger than yourself, a network of thought weaving across continents. The titles you earn mark your progress. After years of study, disputations, and exams, you may earn the degree of baccalaureus, then magister, then doctor. Each title is not just honor, but license, granting you the right to teach. The phrase doctor means teacher, and to gain it is to join the ranks of the masters. The robes you wear, the cap on your head, the staff in your hand, all symbols of authority rooted in this new institution. But for all its grandeur, the university life is not easy. Students riot, fight, gamble, and drink. Masters clash with bishops, popes, and kings over rights and privileges. Townsfolk resent the noisy scholars who clog their streets and refuse to pay debts. The tension sometimes erupts in violence. Paris in 1229, Oxford in 1355, when scholars and citizens fought with stones and swords, leaving bodies in the streets. To be part of a university is to live not only in pursuit of knowledge, but in the midst of constant strife. And yet, you endure, because you sense that this is the future. Monasteries preserve knowledge, cathedrals spread it, but universities explode it outward, systematizing it, organizing it, expanding it. You sit in a crowded hall, quill in hand, listening to a master unravel Aristotle, and you feel the weight of history pressing forward. This, you realize, is the seed of modern education. As night falls, you stumble from a disputation into the cold streets, your head buzzing with arguments about universals and particulars. The cathedral looms behind you, its bells silent now. The taverns glow, their doors spilling warmth and laughter. You join your fellows, cloaks drawn tight, parchment clutched against your chest. You are poor, hungry, tired, and bruised, but you are also part of something immense, something that will endure. You fall asleep in your narrow bed, dreams filled with masters, disputations, and books. Tomorrow the debates will rage again, the lectures will drone, the quills will scratch, and you will endure, because this is the university, the great forge of minds, born in the medieval world yet shaping centuries to come. The bell tolls again, harsh and resonant, echoing down the narrow streets, where students scurry with cloaks pulled tight against the morning chill. Your head is heavy from last night's disputations in the tavern, but you hurry toward the lecture hall, parchment tucked under your arm, ink-stained fingers betraying hours of study. By now you've grown accustomed to the rhythm of this new world, the university. But today, instead of merely focusing on lectures or disputations, you're forced to confront something more practical, more visceral. The daily student life that defines existence in a medieval university town. Forget the silent cloisters of the monastery. Forget the orderly cathedral school where chants echoed beneath stained glass. Here, life is chaotic, vibrant, dangerous, and often absurd. Being a student means juggling poverty, hunger, lessons, disputes, friendships, and rivalries. It means surviving in towns that alternately tolerate and resent you. It means carving an identity as both scholar and troublemaker in a society that doesn't quite know what to do with this swelling population of young, restless men. Your day begins with lectures, of course. You crowd into a drafty hall, benches groaning under the weight of dozens of students. The master reads from Aristotle's Ethics or Lombard sentences, his voice monotone, his commentary thick with Latin glosses. You scratch furiously with your quill, your eyes darting to the parchment, your ears straining not to miss a word. The air is heavy with the smell of ink, sweat, and damp wool. Boys mutter prayers against ink blots, curse under their breath when their quills split, groan softly when the master doubles back to repeat the same point, for emphasis. Hours pass like this, broken only by bells calling to mass or meals. But the lecture is only part of the day. Once the master dismisses you, life spills into the streets, and here the true chaos begins. You and your peers pour out into narrow lanes lined with taverns, inns, parchment sellers, and bakers. Some rush to disputations, where arguments about universals and particulars rage like battles. Others scatter to rented rooms, dark and drafty, where beds are shared, candles sputter, and parchment piles high. You're one of them, scrambling up creaky stairs into a chamber where smoke curls from a tiny fire and the air stinks of unwashed bodies. You and 3 others squeeze into this space, sleeping shoulder to shoulder, quills scratching late into the night by candlelight. Housing is always a problem. Students rent from townsfolk who know opportunity when they see it. Rents are high, conditions poor, landlords cram students together, charge extra for firewood, and threaten eviction if payment falters. Many students are perpetually in debt, pawning cloaks or begging relatives for money. Some band together, forming nations based on their regions of origin. French, English, German, Italian, supporting one another against hostile townsfolk and rival groups. These nations shape not only housing but politics within the university itself, where disputes between nations sometimes erupt into outright brawls. Food is another struggle. The meals of monasteries, simple but steady, are gone. In the city, you buy bread, cheese, ale, maybe some meat if money allows. More often, you go hungry. Taverns offer cheap stews, watered ale, and endless noise. They're filled with scholars debating Aristotle over mugs of beer, slamming fists on tables to make their points. Arguments ignite quickly, sometimes spilling into fights. A broken nose here, a bruised jaw there. This is as much part of student life as disputation. You probably wouldn't survive long without learning to duck when tempers flare. And yet, taverns are essential. They are classrooms after dark, places where you test arguments, forge alliances, and share scraps of knowledge. Masters disapprove, of course, but even they know ideas flow as freely as ale in these smoky halls. Many of the greatest debates begin not in lecture rooms but over greasy tables lit by sputtering candles. Money remains the constant worry. Some students are supported by wealthy families, striding proudly in fine cloaks, their purses heavy. Others scrape by on charity or scholarships from the church. Many go into debt, borrowing from moneylenders, pawning everything they own. Debt collectors haunt the university streets, and fights erupt when students refuse to pay. Yet the hunger for knowledge drives you on, even when your stomach growls and your cloak is threadbare. The townsfolk, meanwhile, look on with a mix of resentment and amusement. To them, students are noisy, arrogant, unruly. You clog their streets, brawl in their taverns, refuse to pay your bills. Riots between students and townspeople erupt regularly, sometimes over rents, sometimes over insults, sometimes for no reason at all. In Oxford in 1355, such a quarrel left dozens dead, a grim reminder of how volatile the relationship is. To be a student is to live on the edge of conflict, shielded by the church's protection, but despised by those who must live alongside you. Back in the classroom, discipline is looser than in monasteries but not absent. Masters cannot whip older students with the same ease, yet punishments remain. A failed disputation may earn humiliation, extra work, or expulsion. A student who insults a master risks excommunication. The church keeps a close watch, wary of heresy. Stray too far into dangerous speculation, deny the Trinity, question free will, and you may find yourself before an inquisitor. The line between intellectual daring and heresy is thin, and you tread it carefully, though late-night tavern debates often push dangerously close. Still, the intellectual life is intoxicating. You sit in disputations, your heart racing as questions are hurled. Can reason prove the existence of God? Is knowledge possible without divine illumination? You argue, object, respond. Your Latin stammering but your courage growing. You leave exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time, you feel not just a boy repeating words, but a thinker shaping them. The thrill of matching wits, of glimpsing truth, of holding your own against peers. It keeps you going through hunger and debt. Outside disputations, you haunt the bookstalls, running your fingers across rare manuscripts. Prices are obscene, sometimes more than a year's rent. But even a glimpse fills you with awe. Aristotle's Physics, Galen's On the Pulse, Augustine's City of God, texts that connect you to centuries and continents. You can't afford them, but you copy passages whenever possible, your cramped script squeezing every word onto scraps of parchment. Knowledge is treasure, and you hoard it like gold. Evenings are filled with study, your candle sputtering low, your eyes burning. You and your roommates argue until your voices crack, correcting one another, mocking mistakes, reciting lines until sleep overtakes you. Sometimes you dream in Latin, waking with declensions still on your tongue. Other nights, you dream of home fields, family, warmth, and wonder if this struggle is worth it. But in the morning you rise again, driven by ambition, faith, or sheer stubbornness. Over time you notice hierarchies forming. Some students rise quickly, mastering disputations, winning admiration, gaining patronage. Others lag, stumbling through lessons, mocked and ignored. Friendships fracture under pressure, alliances shift, rivalries burn. The university is a crucible, refining some, consuming others. You wonder where you will fall among the shining scholars or the forgotten failures, and yet, amid the hardship, you sense you are part of something vast. The university is not just a school, it is a movement, a revolution. Knowledge is being systematized, organized, expanded. The ideas debated here ripple outward, shaping kings, courts, and councils. You are poor, hungry, bruised, but you are also standing at the heart of change. As night falls, you walk through streets lit by torches, the air thick with smoke and laughter. Students spill from taverns, singing in slurred Latin, arm in arm, their cloaks flapping. A fight breaks out in the distance, shouts echoing, but you turn away, heading back to your drafty room. You climb into bed, pulling your cloak tight, parchment tucked safely beneath your pillow. Tomorrow, lectures will drone, disputations will rage, debts will mount, fights will flare, but you will endure, because this is the life of a medieval university student. Chaotic, exhausting, dangerous, but utterly unforgettable. The bell clangs over the rooftops once more, and you shuffle stiffly through the muddy lanes toward the university hall, parchment under your arm and your stomach gnawing at itself. By now you've endured grammar drills, logic disputations, endless copying, and tavern quarrels, but something deeper presses on you as you look around at your fellow students. Not everyone belongs here. You begin to notice who sits beside you on the benches, who can afford parchment, who wears finer cloaks, who speaks with confidence, and who is entirely absent. Today your thoughts dwell on access and exclusion, who could actually attend medieval schools and universities, and who remained shut out. In theory, learning was for those who desired it. In reality, it was for those who could pay or those chosen by grace or luck. The majority of children in medieval Europe never saw the inside of a classroom. They worked the fields, spun wool, tended animals, carried water, learned crafts from parents or masters. Their letters were the plough's furrow, their arithmetic the count of sheep or sacks of grain. For them, school was not even a dream. Who then did attend? Mostly boys, of course, for schooling was overwhelmingly male. In the monastery schools, novices destined for the cloister filled the benches. In cathedral schools, sons of nobles, merchants, and clergy crowded beside one another. At universities, the mix widened slightly but remained restricted. Wealthier families sent their sons to study law, theology, or medicine, while a few exceptionally gifted poor boys squeezed in by charity or patronage. Money was the first gatekeeper. Parchment cost dearly, rooms cost dearly, food cost dearly. Even in charitable schools, expenses piled up. Families with fields to till and mouths to feed rarely spared sons for years of study. A boy had to be either well supported or outstandingly lucky. Many promising children, no doubt, remained unlettered because the family simply could not afford to lose their labour. Then came status. Sons of nobles entered with privilege. They sat in classrooms wearing fine cloaks, servants sometimes carrying their books. They expected education not merely for knowledge, but for power, training to rule estates, serve in courts, or wield influence in the church. Teachers treated them carefully, aware that noble parents held sway over careers. Commoners, by contrast, had to prove themselves constantly, their worth measured in flawless recitation and humility. Any failure could see them dismissed, while nobles might survive blunders on status alone. Clergy families also held advantages. A bishop's nephew, a canon's son, a priest's ward. These boys slipped into schools with ease, sometimes bypassing costs altogether. Their paths to church offices were greased before they began. You watch them with a mix of envy and resentment as they stride confidently into disputations, secure in futures already carved. For poorer boys, entry depended on charity. Some cathedral schools maintained places for poor scholars, funded by the bishop's alms. Monasteries sometimes selected promising children from humble families, giving them food and education in exchange for service. Occasionally, a wealthy patron or noble sponsored a bright boy, seeing potential worth cultivating. These few climbed the ladder by sheer talent and endurance, rising from obscurity into clerical or scholarly life. They were rare, but their presence proved it was not entirely impossible. Yet, for every poor scholar admitted, countless others remained outside. Access was narrow, selective, often arbitrary. If your family lacked wealth, status, or connections, your chance of education was slim. Even among those who entered, many dropped out under the weight of debt or discipline. And what of girls? Here exclusion was almost total. Formal schools were closed to them. Cathedral and university benches remained overwhelmingly male. Girls learned at home, spinning, cooking, managing households. Some noble women received tutors, learning Latin, music, or literature, but they were exceptions. Others, especially those sent to convents, gained more structured education. Nuns taught reading, writing, psalms, sometimes music or even medicine within the cloister, but these opportunities were limited to the fortunate. For most girls, Education meant prayers memorized by ear, not letters copied by hand. This exclusion was not accidental, it was deliberate. The prevailing belief held that women's learning was dangerous, leading to pride, heresy, or sin. Some thinkers warned that teaching girls Latin risked scandal. The church permitted women to read pious works in the vernacular, but discouraged their pursuit of grammar or philosophy. Those who defied these boundaries, Hildegard of Bingen, Heloise, Christine de Pizan, were remarkable precisely because they were exceptions, blazing trails against heavy resistance. As you sit in the crowded hall, you feel the weight of these absences. The benches are filled with young men, mostly from wealth, some from poverty, all bound by Latin. But outside, in fields and kitchens, in convents and villages, countless others remain unlettered, their voices unheard in disputations, their names absent from registers. Education here is not universal, it is privilege. The university itself enforces boundaries. Admission requires proficiency in Latin, already a barrier. If you cannot read or write in the sacred tongue, you cannot even begin. Fees for lectures, parchment, candles, food and lodging ensure that only those with support persist. Masters guard their authority jealously, wary of lowering standards or opening doors too wide. The Guild of Scholars protects itself, granting entry only to those who endure the gauntlet. Even within, divisions persist. Nations form French, English, German, Italian, each competing for influence. Foreign students face suspicion, sometimes hostility. Riots erupt between groups, each defending its privileges. You realize that access is not only about wealth and gender, but about identity. To belong is to be admitted into a nation, to have allies, to speak the right dialect of Latin. To be excluded is to drift alone, vulnerable in a world that values solidarity. At meals, you hear stories of those excluded. A boy from a nearby village begged admission but was turned away, unable to pay. A bright servant overheard lectures from the doorway, memorizing scraps, but was whipped for trespassing. A girl with sharp wit begged her brother to teach her, only to be silenced. These stories haunt you, reminders that your own place on the bench is a privilege built on gates others cannot pass. Yet exclusion shapes education's very nature. Because it is limited, it is treasured. Because it is rare, it is powerful. To know Latin, to read scripture, to argue Aristotle, these make you part of an elite. You feel the weight of that status every time you walk through the market. Townsfolk eyeing your ink-stained hands with suspicion or awe. They know you belong to a world closed to them, a world of words and authority. The irony gnaws at you. The church preaches humility, charity, and universality. Yet its schools guard knowledge like treasure, admitting only a few. Education, meant to illuminate, casts long shadows of exclusion. And you, seated within, benefit from the very walls that shut others out. Still, you cling to your place. You endure the hunger, debt and punishments because you know how rare your opportunity is. You know that with Latin on your tongue and parchment under your hand, you can rise in ways closed to most. Access is privilege, exclusion is the rule, and you live suspended between gratitude and guilt. As night falls, you walk back to your room, the streets echoing with laughter, arguments and the toll of bells. You think of the boys who never sat on these benches, the girls silenced outside these walls, the families who could never afford such study. You think of how narrow the gates are, and how fiercely you must cling to your place within them. Tomorrow, the disputations will rage again, the masters will lecture, the rod will crack, but tonight you fall asleep, knowing that simply to be here is itself a victory denied to most. The bell tolls again, low and steady, and you wake with your cloak pulled tight around your shoulders, the draught creeping through the cracks of your rented room. You drag yourself toward the hall, but today the lessons feel different. The master begins not with grammar drills or disputations, but with a reminder of those who sit in learning's highest seats. You shift on your bench, watching a noble-born boy unroll his parchment with casual ease, a fine cloak draped over his shoulders, a ring glinting on his finger. He represents another world altogether, the world of noble and royal education, where learning does not mean huddling in smoky taverns or scratching at wax tablets, but rather studying under private tutors in richly furnished chambers, with every advantage of wealth and birth. While you struggle with ink stains and debts, noble children receive instruction in far more comfortable settings. Picture a castle hall warmed by a great fire, tapestries fluttering on the walls, servants bustling with trays of food. In such a place, a tutor guides the sons and daughters of lords and kings. The education is not entirely different in content. The Trivium and Quadrivium still loom large, but its atmosphere is utterly unlike your cold benches and rod-bearing masters. For noble boys, education is tailored to prepare them for leadership. Latin remains central, for it is the language of law, diplomacy, and the church. Tutors drill them in grammar and rhetoric, but with more patience, less punishment. Mistakes do not bring rods but corrections, because a noble's dignity must not be humiliated. Alongside Latin, they learn French or another vernacular tongue suitable for courtly speech. Poetry and history become part of their curriculum, for a nobleman must quote poets and recall the deeds of ancestors. Then there are practical skills: riding, hunting, swordplay, diplomacy. These are not taught in your cramped hall, but in wide courtyards, in forests, in lists, where knights joust. Noble education is holistic: mind and body, letters and weapons. A prince learns not only to debate, but to fight, to compose letters, as well as to command armies. You envy them, for their lessons seem less like punishment and more like privilege. Noble girls, too, often receive private instruction. They learn to read and write, sometimes in Latin but more often in vernacular languages. They study music, embroidery, etiquette, and occasionally philosophy or theology, depending on the household. Queens and princesses are expected to act as regents, to manage estates, to correspond with kings. A few extraordinary women like Eleanor of Aquitaine or Blanche of Castile wield education as a tool of rule, outshining many men. But for most, noble learning emphasizes refinement and piety rather than disputations on Aristotle. The royal courts elevate this further. Imagine the palace of a king, where scholars gather not only to teach, but to advise. Princes are schooled by the best minds of their age, chosen by popes or bishops. They are fed not just lessons, but ideologies, training to govern kingdoms. A royal child might have entire schools within the court, with tutors for each subject, from theology to astronomy to heraldry. The atmosphere is charged with politics. Education here is not just about knowledge, but about preparing heirs to wield power. Your master tells stories of great rulers shaped by their learning. Charlemagne, who gathered scholars like Alcuin of York to revive learning across his empire. Frederick II, the Stupa Mundi, who studied law, science, and philosophy, corresponding with Muslim scholars, kings and emperors, who saw knowledge as a weapon equal to the sword. Their education was not a struggle against hunger and debt, but a pathway into absolute authority. And yet, noble education has its weaknesses. Surrounded by comfort, some nobles lack discipline. Without rods and punishments, many grow lazy, taking learning for granted. Their tutors sigh in frustration, coaxing them rather than striking them. Some princes mock their studies, preferring hunting or feasting. The difference is stark. For you, education is survival. For them, it is ornament. You cannot afford to fail, while they can stumble and still inherit estates and titles. Still, nobles command resources you can only dream of. They own books, actual bound volumes, illuminated and gilded. Where you strain to copy a single psalm, they leaf through manuscripts of poetry, chronicles, even romances. Their libraries gleam with leather bindings and gold. Their scribes labor to provide them with texts you will never see. For them, books are not rare treasures chained to lecterns, but possessions displayed with pride. This disparity bleeds into the universities too. Noble students arrive better prepared, with tutors behind them, wealth to ease their way, and servants to attend them. They wear fine clothes, eat better meals, pay their debts without trouble. They stride confidently into disputations, unafraid of failure, for their family's power cushions them. Poor scholars mutter under their breath, but the hierarchy is clear. Status follows you even into the lecture hall. And yet, there are moments of convergence. On the bench, noble and peasant sons sometimes sit side by side, chanting the same Latin, struggling with the same logic, scribbling with the same ink. The rod may not strike the noble as often, but the demands of knowledge remain. Aristotle does not bend to birth, nor does Cicero care for cloaks. In those moments, education briefly feels like an equalizer, but outside, the gap yawns wide. While you rent a drafty room, nobles lodge in fine houses. While you eat bread crusts, they dine on meat and wine. While you pawn your cloak, they commission an illuminated manuscripts. Access may bring you into the same hall, but privilege shapes how you experience it. You live at the edge of survival. They live in abundance. You wonder sometimes what it would be like to trade places, to study without hunger gnawing at you, to learn without fearing debt collectors, to hold books instead of begging to copy them. You dream of tapestries, tutors, and libraries. But then you remind yourself, privilege breeds complacency. Perhaps in some strange way, your hunger sharpens you, drives you harder. Perhaps your learning, won by sweat and fear, cuts deeper than theirs. As evening falls, you leave the hall and watch a noble student mount his horse, the servant holding his reins. You trudge back to your cold room, but you carry with you the realization that education is not one thing, but many. For nobles, it is comfort, polish, preparation for rule. For you, it is struggle, survival, a desperate climb upward. Both shape the world, but in different ways. Tomorrow the bell will ring again, and you will scratch Latin declensions into parchment until your fingers ache. Somewhere, in a castle hall, a prince will practice the same declensions under softer hands, with a fire at his back and servants waiting nearby. You both learn the same words, yet your worlds are divided by walls of privilege. Still, knowledge binds you faintly together, a fragile thread stretching between hunger and abundance, between benches and thrones. The bell rattles across the stone towers once again, summoning you back to the benches where ink-stained hands clutch wax tablets and parchment. But today, your master points out something different. He gestures toward the cloister where veiled figures move silently, toward the convents scattered across the land, toward noble households where daughters of lords sit with tutors. The lesson shifts. The education of medieval girls. You straighten on your bench because this subject is half-whispered, rarely admitted into the open, and yet essential for understanding who was permitted to learn and how. Girls, for the most part, are excluded from formal schools. The benches around you are filled only with boys, their voices droning in unison. The rules of the cathedral and the statutes of the university leave no space for female students. Yet beyond these walls, girls are not entirely cut off from learning. Their education takes different shapes, hidden in convents, shaped by households, filtered through expectation. It is unequal, but not absent. In convents, girls often receive their most structured education. Nuns, many of them literate, serve as teachers for young novices or boarders from noble families. Here, girls learn to read, not only in Latin, but sometimes in the vernacular, psalms, prayers, the pulsar. These form the backbone of their instruction. Writing, too, is taught, with quills scratching on parchment under the watchful eyes of veiled instructors. Music and chant are essential, because convent life revolves around prayer. Girls' voices rise in choir, echoing against chapel walls just as boys chant in cathedral schools. Some convents extend further. In wealthy abbeys, girls study not only piety but also medicine, herbal law, history, and even rudimentary philosophy. Hildegard of Bingen, a brilliant abbess of the 12th century, exemplifies this world. Her writings on theology, natural science, and music show how convent education could, in rare cases, flower into extraordinary scholarship. Yet for most girls, convent schooling aims at devotion and discipline, not disputations on Aristotle. Outside convents, noble households provide another path. Daughters of lords are taught by private tutors, often alongside brothers. Their education includes reading and writing, but also music, embroidery, household management, and courtly manners. They learn to compose letters, to manage estates, to recite poetry. For queens and princesses, this training is political. They must correspond with kings, negotiate marriages, oversee lands, Blanche of Castile, mother of Louis IX of France, was famed for her wisdom, much of it rooted in the education she received as a royal daughter. Still, noble girls' lessons are shaped by expectation. They are taught to be pious, obedient, graceful. Too much learning risks criticism. A woman who quotes Aristotle too confidently may be called proud, dangerous, unfeminine. Christine de Pizan, one of the rare female writers of the later Middle Ages, defended women's learning fiercely, but her very existence proves how exceptional such figures were. The general rule remains: girls may learn enough to read prayers, manage households, inspire virtue, but not enough to rival men in theology or law. For merchant and artisan families, the picture shifts again. Girls in towns sometimes learn to read vernacular languages, especially for practical purposes, keeping accounts, reading letters, managing trade. Mothers and fathers pass down arithmetic, weights and measures, the rhythms of the market. Some daughters of guild families attend song schools or elementary grammar lessons, though rarely beyond the basics. Literacy among urban women grows slowly, feeding the expansion of devotional reading and household management. Vernacular prayer books, psalters, and romances begin to circulate, designed for their eyes. Yet for the vast majority of peasant girls, education is oral. They learn by ear: prayers, songs, stories, remedies. Their hands learn through practice: milking cows, spinning wool, baking bread, brewing ale. Literacy is not part of their world. The fields are their classroom, their parents their teachers. They may never see a wax tablet or a quill. Their knowledge is practical, embodied, essential, but invisible to the world of parchment and disputation. The attitudes of men shape all this. Many clerics warn against female learning. Some argue that women by nature are weaker in intellect, prone to error. They cite Eve as proof of women's danger. Others fear that literacy makes women unruly, undermining their obedience. These views close doors, ensuring that formal schools and universities remain male domains. Yet at the same time, women are essential transmitters of culture, teaching children prayers, preserving stories, shaping households. The paradox is sharp. Women educate, but are denied education. Despite exclusion, cracks appear. In some towns, girls attend parish schools with boys, at least for elementary reading. In some convents, women copy manuscripts, their delicate hands preserving text for centuries. In some noble households, daughters become as literate as sons, corresponding with kings, composing poems, even commissioning translations. These cracks widen slowly, preparing the way for later movements where women's voices will grow louder. But in the Middle Ages, the imbalance is stark. You glance around your classroom. All boys, no girls, no sisters or cousins beside you. The absence speaks louder than any presence. You realize that your chance at Latin disputations and degrees is not only rare but gendered. Half the population is shut out entirely, their learning confined to cloisters or kitchens. This realization nags at you during the evening disputations. When arguments rage about universals, when Aristotle is quoted, when psalms are dissected, you wonder what voices are missing. What might a convent girl contribute? With her knowledge of herbs and music, what might a noble lady argue? Trained in letters and politics, the benches remain silent, but your imagination fills them with absent figures. At night, you pass a convent on your way home, its windows glowing faintly with candlelight. You hear the faint chant of nuns, their voices rising steady and serene. You picture young girls inside, learning psalms just as you do, scratching letters onto parchment, guided by patient nuns. The world is separate, but not entirely alien. Parallel classrooms, divided by walls of gender, yet echoing the same Latin words. You crawl into your straw mattress, ink still on your hands, the chant of nuns still in your ears. Tomorrow you will return to your all-male benches, reciting declensions, enduring rods, debating Aristotle, but you will carry with you the awareness that education in the medieval world is not one story, but many. Boys in monasteries, nobles in castles, girls in convents, peasants in fields, all shaped by what they are allowed or denied. And so, when you close your eyes, you see not only your own bench, but countless others. A convent girl tracing psalms, a noblewoman writing letters, a merchant's daughter tallying accounts, a peasant girl chanting prayers by firelight. Education in the Middle Ages is a patchwork of access and exclusion, voices present and voices silenced. And tomorrow, when the bell tolls again, you'll be reminded of how narrow your own path is and how many others walk paths unseen. When you walk through the town after class, you see it everywhere. The shoemaker's apprentice hammers at leather under his master's gaze. The blacksmith's boy pumps the bellows, sweat streaking his soot-covered face. The baker's helper rises before dawn, hauling sacks of flour heavier than himself. Each one is in school, though no wax tablets or Latin psalters lie before them. Their textbooks are hammers, knives, needles, ovens. Their teachers are masters of craft, stern but skilled. Their lessons are long, exhausting, and utterly practical. The morning bell pulls you from uneasy dreams, and your body aches as though it remembers every hour of rote chanting and rod strikes from days past. The benches are the same, the ink still stains your fingertips, the master's eyes still pierce like arrows, but today he speaks not of Psalms or Aristotle. Today his voice turns toward the world beyond the classroom, toward the streets, the fields, the guild halls. He reminds you that not all learning rests on parchment and disputations. Much of education in the Middle Ages happens outside school walls. Today's lesson is about apprenticeships, guild schools, and the many practical ways children and young people learned their crafts. Apprenticeship begins young. A boy of 10, sometimes even younger, is bound to a master for years, 7, 10, even 12. His parents sign a contract, often sealed before witnesses, agreeing that the boy will serve faithfully, obey orders, and not marry during his term. In return, the master promises to teach the craft, provide food, clothing, shelter, discipline. Payment may exchange hands, but the true currency is time. For a decade, the boy's life is consumed by the rhythms of the workshop. Apprenticeships are not limited to trades. Guild schools exist for merchants' sons, where they learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and bookkeeping. Instead of Aristotle, they study ledgers, columns of numbers, weights and measures. They learn to calculate profits, to balance accounts, to draft contracts. In Italian city-states like Florence or Venice, these schools thrive, preparing young men for commerce across the Mediterranean. Their Latin may be limited, but their numbers are sharp, and their pens skilled in contracts rather than commentaries. Day by day, the apprentice learns. At first he sweeps floors, stokes fires, runs errands. Slowly he is allowed to touch tools, to cut leather, to hammer nails, to stir dye. Mistakes are punished, sometimes with harsh words, sometimes with blows, but skill grows, muscle memory building with each repetition. By the end of his term, he knows the craft intimately, not from books, but from his own calloused hands. When he becomes a journeyman, he can travel, sell his labor, and eventually perhaps become a master with apprentices of his own. For many children, song schools offer another route. Attached to parish churches, these schools teach basic literacy and music, training boys to sing in choirs. Here they learn psalms, chants, and rudimentary grammar. Some advance to cathedral schools, but many remain, their lives shaped by music and service in local churches. Song schools form a bridge, a modest education for those not destined for monasteries or universities. And then there are the craft guilds themselves, powerful associations that regulate trades across towns. Each guild guards its secrets, teaching them only to apprentices within. A weaver's guild ensures that cloth meets standards. A mason's guild trains boys to carve stone with precision. A goldsmith guild keeps its recipes for alloys hidden from outsiders. Education here is not about disputations, but about protecting knowledge as a form of economic power. To belong to a guild is to enter a world of tradition, hierarchy, and discipline, as strict as any monastery. Girls, too, sometimes enter this world. Daughters of artisans learn their family trades: brewing, baking, weaving, midwifery. Some apprenticeships formally bind girls, particularly in textile crafts. A girl might spend years at a loom, her fingers learning patterns as surely as a boy learns Latin declensions. Others train in households, mastering the arts of cooking, sewing, and managing servant skills essential for running homes and estates. Their learning is practical, invisible to formal records, but vital to daily life. The Church views this practical education with approval. Work is holy, labor is service. Guilds often dedicate chapels, fund altars, march in processions under banners of saints. Learning a trade is framed not merely as economic survival, but as moral discipline. Obedience to a master echoes obedience to God. Skill in craft mirrors the divine order of creation. Yet there is pride too. To master a craft is to hold dignity, to belong to a community. Journeymen travel, carrying their skills from town to town, welcomed by guild brothers, earning wages, building reputations. A mason who chisels stone for cathedrals leaves a mark more lasting than parchment. A weaver whose cloth drapes a noble's shoulders contributes to society as surely as a scholar's disputation. The discipline of apprenticeship is fierce. Masters hold authority as absolute as schoolmasters. Apprentices are fed and housed, but also beaten if lazy, bound to obedience, sometimes treated harshly. Some run away, seeking freedom in cities only to be dragged back by law. Contracts are enforceable, and breaking them carries penalties. Apprenticeship is both opportunity and bondage, shaping lives with iron rules. By evening, as you collapse onto your straw pallet, you think of all the kinds of students who filled this day. Not only boys chanting psalms, but bakers' apprentices kneading dough, weavers' daughters learning patterns, choir boys memorizing chants. Education in this world is not a single stream, but a river with many branches, some hidden, some loud, all flowing towards survival. Tomorrow you will chant Latin again, your quill scratching against parchment, but tonight you fall asleep, hearing not only the echo of disputations, but the steady hammering of apprentices, the creak of looms, the chant of song schools, all the other classrooms of the medieval world. Walking home after lectures, you pass workshops glowing with firelight, apprentices bent over anvils, looms and ovens. Their masters bark orders, their hands move with practiced rhythm. You realize that these too are schools, different from your own, but equally relentless. The medieval world is full of classrooms, stone halls, convent cloisters, guild workshops, market stalls. Each teaches, each shapes, each prepares souls for their place in the order of things. You, as a student of parchment and disputations, sometimes envy the apprentices. Their learning is physical, their results tangible. They carve, weave, bake, brew. You merely argue and copy. They emerge with skills the world needs daily. You wonder if your Latin will ever feed you as surely as their bread feeds townsfolk. Yet they, perhaps, envy you too. For while their hands grow strong, their minds remain bound to the rhythms of trade. Your path, narrow and difficult, leads toward law, theology, and the halls of power. The bells toll again in the grey dawn, and you rise wearily from your straw bed, every joint stiff, every finger still bearing black stains of ink. You shuffle toward the hall with your wax tablet under your arm. Yet you know today feels different. The lessons have wound their way through monasteries, cathedrals, universities, noble castles, convents, guilds. You have tasted grammar, rhetoric, logic, the quadrivium, the punishments, the tools, the routine. Now, at last, your master speaks not of rules or drills, but of what remains, what legacy medieval schools leave behind. You sit straighter on your bench, for once the rod rests unused against the desk. The master's voice is quieter, as if the weight of centuries presses on him. He tells you that schools in the Middle Ages were not simply about survival, or obedience, or even Latin. They were the bridge between the crumbling ruins of Rome and the rising dawn of the Renaissance. Without them, he says, the knowledge of the ancients would have been lost. Without them, the future would have been empty. Think of the monasteries. Cold cloisters, candlelit scriptoria, boys chanting psalms until their throats cracked. It was there that text survived. Scripture, yes, but also Virgil, Cicero, Aristotle, monks, bent over parchment, copying line after line, preserved words that would otherwise have vanished in fire or neglect. Their schools shaped not only the next generation of clergy, but the very survival of learning itself. If you hold a quill today, it is because they held theirs centuries before you. Think of the cathedral schools, crowded halls beside soaring towers of stone, voices echoing beneath stained glass, disputations clashing like swords. They widened the gate, drawing not only monks but nobles, merchants, sons of artisans. They sharpened minds with rhetoric and logic, laid foundations for universities, turned learning into a public force. They taught you not only to recite, but to argue, to persuade, to think. They birthed scholasticism, that fierce blend of faith and reason that would dominate for centuries. Think of the universities, Bologna, Paris, Oxford, cities alive with parchment sellers, taverns, disputations. There, learning became organized, systematized, granted structure, degrees, faculties, lectures, disputations. These were born in your time, but they remain in ours. The very idea of a university, a community of masters and scholars, still stands today, centuries later. When you argue in smoky taverns, when you copy glosses by candlelight, you are not only learning, you are forging a model that endures across the world. And think of those outside, the noble halls where princes studied with tutors, the convents where nuns taught psalms to young girls, the guild workshops where apprentices hammered, stitched, brewed, and wove. All of these were schools, though they did not call themselves so. All passed knowledge from hand to hand, voice to voice, tool to tool. Each formed part of the tapestry of learning, threads interwoven with hardship, devotion, privilege, and skill. The master reminds you that education in the Middle Ages was narrow. It excluded many peasants, girls, the poor. It demanded suffering, obedience, endless repetition. It wielded the rod as much as the book. But within those narrow walls, something powerful grew. A seed planted in cloisters, sprouted in cathedrals, blossomed in universities, and stretched toward the Renaissance. Without medieval schools, there would be no printing press, no humanism, no modern science. You are the link in a chain that stretches forward. You look around the room. The benches are filled with weary boys, some noble, some poor, all bound by Latin. Their faces blur in the candlelight, yet you realize they are not just students, they are the carriers of memory. They will become priests, lawyers, teachers, guild masters. They will shape laws, sermons, books. Their education, harsh and narrow, will ripple outward into courts, churches, markets, kingdoms. And you, exhausted, ink-stained, half-starved, are part of it. You feel both crushed and elevated. Crushed by the endless drills, the punishments, the hunger. Elevated by the realization that you belong to something vast, a centuries-long effort to keep words alive. You may not survive every disputation, every rod, every debt collector, but the words you copy, the chants you recite, the arguments you endure, they survive, they pass forward, beyond you. As the master's voice fades, you hear the bells again calling to vespers. The day's lessons end, the cycle continues. Tomorrow you will rise again, recite again, copy again. But tonight you carry the awareness of legacy. Medieval schools are not simply your burden, they are your inheritance, and through you, they will become someone else's. You leave the hall slowly, the air crisp, the stars burning above the cloister. You glance upward, remembering astronomy lessons, constellations mapped in shaky lines. You smile faintly, because the stars look unchanged. Though everything on earth shifts, you walk back to your straw bed, the chant of monks drifting across the cloister, the memory of Aristotle and Augustine still buzzing in your ears. You lie down, close your eyes, and feel the centuries leaning forward into you. And now, the story of medieval schools draws to its end, not with the crack of a rod or the scraping of a quill, but with the echo of legacy. The bells grow softer now, no longer harsh commands but gentle echoes fading into the night. The stone walls that once felt cold and stern seem to breathe with quiet warmth, their centuries of memory softening in the glow of candlelight. You are no longer sitting stiffly on a bench or scratching frantically at parchment. Instead, you rest, letting the rhythm of the cloister calm your restless thoughts. The voices of boys chanting Latin fade into whispers. The rod of the master is set aside. The ink stains on your fingers wash away. All that remains is the steady hush of learning itself, a current flowing gently through time. You imagine the words you copied, psalms, poems, fragments of Aristotle, drifting upward like smoke, joining the stars above. They do not vanish. They remain, waiting for others to read, to recite, to carry forward. The nuns in their convents, the apprentices at their looms, the nobles in their castles, all their classrooms settle into silence too. 1,000 different schools, each with its own rhythm, folding softly into the night. You realize you are not alone. The whole medieval world breathes together, its lessons weaving into a tapestry that stretches far beyond the walls of one classroom. Your breathing slows, your body loosens. You no longer feel the sting of the rod, the ache of your back, the hunger in your belly. You feel instead the quiet dignity of endurance, the gentle pride of belonging to something larger. Education, however harsh, is not just toil. It is continuity, memory, survival. So, rest now. Let the bells toll far away. Let the parchment lie blank for tonight. Tomorrow will bring lessons again, but tonight belongs to peace, to silence, to dream. Sweet dreams.